Hello, and welcome to my monthly talk, where, as my daughters were reassuring me today as they were leaving to get the train, they said, "That's okay, Mommy, don't be nervous. You're just going to go online and nerdjack for an hour." And I said, "Well, actually, I'm only nerdjacking for a half an hour, but that's our favorite word in our house right now, where we just like whatever the special interest subject is of the moment, we're nerdjacking for however long that takes." So anyway, I'm going to get started here. Today, we're going to talk about Shen, or as I've titled this lecture, the elegance of being. Uh, People often ask me why I chose Chinese medicine. And I always tell them it's because it's the most elegant way I've ever found that someone has been able to explain the way the human body works to me. And I feel like that concept of elegance really has to do with both the complexity and the simplicity of it. There's an aesthetic there that I like a lot about it. So anyway, this month we're going to continue our theme of Chinese medicine and mental health. And for us, that means talking about the Shen. Sorry, not the Shen, the Shen. Um, and how that word integrates through Chinese medicine the concept of the mind, spirit, soul, etc., into the holistic model of our human design. And so we're going to start by just asking the very basic question: what is Shen? Uh, it's a good question, and I think it's important because for me, I find that word Shen to be a lot like the word chi to a non-Chinese speaker like myself, right? There's clearly no one-to-one translation, and yet it's the complexity of the language and translation that really give it the fluidity that it needs to occupy the multiple layers of purpose that it has within the body. And this is where that elegance lives, the poetry, if you will, of medicine. And I'm going to start off by saying that I've relied really heavily on the translations of Elizabeth Rochette because I have found, and you can't blame my husband for this, but I found that when attempting to explain different cultural concepts, it really helps to come back to a really good translation of the language and the nuance of the specific words we use to describe that language. And Elizabeth is one of the foremost translators that we have. And she's more than a translator, that doesn't do her service, but she's just one of the great minds we have of somebody who's coming in and really integrating for us this the way we translate language and the way we experience the language of Chinese medicine. So she does a great job of sort of digging into these words. And her best translation of this Shen is sort of mind spirit. And I'll do my best to explain how that works by starting with the spirit part. And this character that you see here by Shen, I put it there next to the word, this character, it can literally be translated as spirits in Chinese medicine. And we say that these spirits are pure, right, and celestial or heavenly, and that they dwell in the heart. And I like to think of this as the bit of spiritual stuff that we've borrowed to imbue our own consciousness. And this is a quote from her book, The Eight Extraordinary Meridians. When we are dealing with the spirits, Shen, we are dealing with our most precious intermediary with heaven. But the special connection between heaven and each individual is that the Shen come from heaven and dwell in the heart, as long as the heart is tranquil and still. The spirits are always moving around, and if they come and stay, they change our state of mind, because mind and heart, here we see the character Shin, are the same character in Chinese medicine. And I just love that quote because it kind of sets you up a little bit for the biology, if you will, of how we look at this in Chinese medicine. And it really gives you a sense that, again, I think as I mentioned in my lecture last month, we were talking about how the vestiges of spiritual medicine really still exist in the language that we use to talk about Chinese medicine today. And we're going to take a little bit of a look at how, we can use the language and it serves its purpose, but we also have the biology to back that up. But I think it's really important to begin here. Like we begin at the beginning and the idea that there is that spiritual thing, because I think there's some stuff about the intangible, right, that we have to take into account. And this is another reason why I think the the word for Shen and the word for Chi, when we're looking at those, they're difficult to describe. There is a bit of intangibility within these words, but much in the same way that we talk about our mental health, or that thing that makes us us, right? That the all of the little bits of us, that sort of that spark of life, right? So I think that it's important that we kind of start where we begin. And I like this idea that they're the most precious intermediary with heaven. Whether you believe in heaven or not, I tend to use that as a very basic term. It's language, it's not truth. So anyway, it kind of brings me to the other piece of the Shen. So we talked about mind spirit. So that is the spiritual aspect of what that word Shen means in Chinese, according to Chinese medicine. But we also say that it's the mind, because some of these spirits are stored in the brain. And they take the clear essence from the organs and they turn it into enlightenment. And I think this is one of the reasons why I talk so much to my patients who suffer from anxiety about how and why intellectual pursuits have a cost. And the cost takes the form of the essence that we make using our blood. And so when we're doing brain heavy work, it's particularly important to nourish our blood, which, if you can see here, this is how I tend to treat, blood deficiency in my clinic, with rest and beets and eggs and protein and fruit and B vitamins and things that are sweet and salty. And these are all foods that really nourish the blood. But this is also how you would look to treat things like anemia in Western medicine. And so, again, we're kind of coming back to this. There's a brain connection, there's a spiritual connection, there's also a body connection. So, Shen work is brain work. It takes essence in the brain with the Shen to do things. And so that's one of the ways that we sort of prioritize our health when we're doing stuff that requires intellectual pursuit. Um, and finally, there's a really strong correlation between a Shen and consciousness, in a way that sort of all of these things, spirit, essence, enlightenment, they sort of coalesce into what we would call the orifices, which in Chinese medicine sort of generally refer to the sensory organs, most prominently the eyes. And thus there's a connection to how we experience our world from a receptive point of view, which is also echoed in the association with the Shen of the heart and the emperor, who can only lead from a place of receiving really all of the information, right, about the status of his empire and any potential incoming threats. So you'll see this metaphor play out in our classical works and things like that. But we will refer to the heart as the emperor, and we're going to get into the other Shen in a minute. But this idea that the emperor is there, sitting on high, gathering information with which he can use to rule and govern the kingdom. And so this is an important piece of how we look at the Shen. It's all kind of wrapped up in that language, but these are all the nuances to what that word really means to us from a perspective of what it means in Chinese medicine. So yes, the Shen is there, and it's connected to the eyes and to our sensory input, and it's connected to the brain and how we think and within our intellect, and it's connected to the spirit, that piece of ourselves that is sort of not of this world, but connects us with, the energies of life. And so I wanted to make sure we could hit all of those pieces in this first part here. And next, I hate to break it to you, now that we've had a little bit of introduction into what the Shen is, hey, guess what, kids? There's more than one. There are, in fact, six, if you count them. And I've only put five here because to begin that conversation, we really have to go back to the five elements. And then there are six, but if you consider the six really comes if you consider their unification, right, as an independent concept of like the wuxing, right, as we would say. But I have to bring you back to the five elements. And there's a lecture about the five elements here on YouTube if you'd like to go and look at it. I've got a whole series of TCM foundations where I go into a lot of these sort of strange concepts within Chinese medicine, or they might seem strange to a non-Chinese person like myself. And so I talk a little bit about that, but some of these fundamental concepts we're going to touch back to again and again, like the yin and the yang, and the five elements. And I even go into some of the substances, the ways we break down and categorize the body. So I love the five elements. I'll come back to them again and again because I just think they're beautiful. But I digress. The five Shen, when coming together, make the sixth, the Wuxing, are associated here with the five elements, and they are sort of as follows. We've got the Shen of the heart, the emperor of the heart, right? And this is heavily associated with awareness. And so, again, you see here over the five elements diagram, the heart is the fire organ. It's associated with fire, but we find that fusion and communication play an important role here. This is that emperor sitting in the tower, gathering information, being able to make decisions, more importantly, being able to communicate and give orders to the rest of the body, which is huge. So they are aware and communicating, and that's the Shen. When we say Shen, like I know it's confusing, but like there is the Shen with a capital S, and I know I put a capital in there. I'm sorry, you guys, and then there's the Shen, heart Shen. So, but anyway, and then there's also the Zhi, which is down here in the water element, and that's the kidneys, the will to act. And this is very much associated with intention and effort, right? The word that comes to mind too is imagination. This idea that, like, through this water element, like all the things are possible with the right amount of effort and direction, right? The Yi is the intellect of the spleen, and that's associated with the earth element. And that is very heavily associated with discernment. So we find that like overthinking is the pathology of the spleen, a mind that can't stop making decisions and judgments, and discerning all of the details, like analyzing every little bit. That's a Yi thing. But they also like really excels at things like negotiation and moderation. So because the Yi can sort of go through and discern, there's a sense of justice and a sense of balance that exists within that organ that doesn't exist other places. And then we have the Po, which is associated with the metal element, and that is the corporeal soul of the lungs. And again, we talk about things like discrimination or boundaries with the Po, but most importantly, the thing that sort of defines the Po in my mind is that it's like the soul that's attached to your body. So it's the one that's really heavily body based. And when your body dies, it dies with your body. It doesn't have a connection, that sort of spiritual connection that the rest of them do. Or maybe it does, but only through its yin yang pair, the Hun, right, which is the other piece of the Shen that's associated with the liver organ and the wood element. And that's called the ethereal soul of the liver. And it really is that bit of that soul bit that sort of like does the work during the body. So it's tethered to the body, and when the body dies, it's released from the body. And so I think the Hun is like what a traditional Western soul would be. Um, but it's tethered to the Po, which is the very bit of the corporeal Shen that is part of the body. And then the Yi and the Zhi are really about like what you're doing in this life, right? Like your action, your intention, your thinking, thoughtful mind, right? And then of course you've got the Shen of the heart, which is guiding and leading everybody where they need to be. And I just want to say that like there's entire branches of treatment and diagnosis models that rely heavily on the five element cycle, or the wuxing as it's called in TCM, and they use them a lot to treat mental health. And so I just think it's important to note that, well, like classically There are the five Shen of the Wuxing, right? There's also the element correspondences, that fire, earth, metal, water, wood cycle. And that influences a lot of the way that we use the mental emotional aspects that are sort of attributed to the Shen. And they call that the five phase theory when you start looking at those elemental correspondences. And you can see in the five phase theory, obviously, it's the legacy of those five Shen. But in this model, it's their linked organs that really help us form a constitutional diagnosis. But again, the Shen are linked to the organs in the body. We make constitutional diagnoses from physical symptoms in the body, and that's what we use. And then we treat, by treating the physical body, we treat psycho-emotional conditions. And we're going to get to more on that later. But you know, well, that's about the next section. But again, these are the ways that we connect that mind-body thing, because, yep, if you've heard me say it once, you've heard me say it 1,000 times. Chinese medicine is holistic medicine. And in Chinese medicine, the spirit and the body are one. They are, you know, separate but equal. No, not separate. That's horrible. No, they are one. They are connected, and they rely on each other, and you can't separate. You can't have one without the other. So the entire system of explanation for the physiological workings of the human organism happen within the context of the larger natural world, and with the understanding that we are a whole and not just the sum of our parts, right? And the words in Chinese medicine that we use to describe those are Xing, Shen, or roughly translated into body mind, which, according to Wu Danshu, is a single unified concept, right? So body mind. Um, I joke in our household. I tell this story a lot. My husband and I have co-parented for the last almost 15 years now. And the kids sort of like, you never know which parent is sort of available at what time to do what you want. And so they'll always run into the room and they'll say, mommy, but they'll find daddy. So they'll say, mommy, daddy, or they'll run into the room and they'll say, daddy, oh, and they'll find me and they'll be like, mommy. And so we now affectionately refer to ourselves as the mommy daddy or the daddy mommy, because like we're kind of interchangeable. Like we're the parent, right? But I feel when I hear this word body mind, I was like, ooh, yeah, it's like mommy, daddy, body mind. But I think it's important to understand that like they are connected, right? They are the same. And I like this quote, spirit is the righteous chi. Spirit is the abode of the chi. It is chi which transforms spirit. And so in this way, you can see that the chi of the body is the yin aspect, right, of the yin yang pair, that the chi spirit, that is kind of the chi spirit relationship, right, or the chi shen relationship. And chi is definitely of this physical world, right? And yet it is 100% interconnected to the Shen spirit. And so along this line, we also begin to sort of recognize that while there's a religious context within the framework, the word itself is actually referring to physiological expressions. And therefore, was sort of when used in a medical context, it can accommodate both the emotional and the physical effects of disorder or illness. So some of the physical symptoms of a disordered spirit are very physical, really. We look at that in Chinese medicine: a quiet voice, a dullness in the eyes, a collapsed physical affect, apathy, slow speech patterns, an inability to respond to questions. These all bear a striking resemblance to the alert and oriented that we're taught to chart when interviewing a patient with normal consciousness according to Western medicine, right? So that's i.e. like, do you know who you are, who others are, where you are, when you are, and what's going on? And those are the kinds of questions that we ask a person who's come in when we're concerned about just how conscious they are. And it's something that everyone who's been to medical school is taught. But we kind of take that one step further in Chinese medicine, and we look at things like a quiet voice, dull eyes, slow speech, inability to respond. And so these are physical symptoms, right, of that disordered body mind. And so I think we can talk about whether it's spirits. I was looking into all my books today, you guys, or yesterday. I was looking at my books and I found some really, really great quotes from some of the classics where, doctors are talking about like, and the spirits tapped me on the shoulder and whispered in my ear. And so you can't deny that those exist. And at the same time, within a modern context, that's not how we practice, right? There was a quote that I was reading that I didn't put in the slides, but I'll read it to you now. And I really liked it. It's from Bob Flaw's books, right? So, following this line of reasoning, in contemporary professional Chinese medicine, spirit is nothing other than a certain quantity of heart qi. Thus, the concept of spirit in Chinese medicine is not spiritual in any conventional religious sense. As we have seen, the term spirit within the Chinese language as a whole is multivalent. In philosophical cosmological context, it does refer to the ineffable motivating force of the universe. In addition, the same word meant God and spirit and the nature of spirits, ghosts, and other non material beings. However, these other usages of the word spirit should not be conflated with this same work when used in a Chinese medical context. And so it's interesting because, again, the contemporary professional practice of Chinese medicine, while it's still there in our language and it's still there when we try to define the concepts behind why this word is what it is and why the connections are the way they are, the modern practice of Chinese medicine using the Shen today is very much body based. Um, and so, I just wanted to, we've kind of danced around the language. We've taken ourselves to the heavens and grounded back into our bodies in much the same way that chi is sort of this ephemeral impulse between synapses, right? And spark is that spark, and spirit is that spark of life. We still don't have the science for, but that doesn't make it any less real or valuable as a construct on which to attempt to treat the human condition using the human body. And these are words that help us translate healing into a holistic context. And that becomes a very powerful tool for modern illness. So that's my presentation for today. And if any of you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the chat, either in the comments on the YouTube video or in the Facebook Live. And happy to answer any questions that you have. And if you're watching it on repeat, just go ahead and give me a hashtag repeat, and I'll give you a shout out and see what I can do about answering any questions that you have. But it was really fun exploration going back to my books on Shen and trying to dig a little bit deeper. I do find that tether between the philosophical and the physical is an interesting subject, and I like to keep an open mind, and I also like to be well grounded, as it were. But ultimately, when we're talking about how we treat mental health, being able to use the tools we have available to us in a way that is meaningful, both physically and emotionally, is a really beautiful thing. Next month, I'm going to be talking about fertility a little bit because I've had a lot of people asking me questions about that. And so, if you have any questions about fertility or things that are sort of burning questions, go ahead and shoot me an email. Let me know. I've put up the link to my website, elementalwellness.net, and you can always send me a contact form there, or you can email me. My email is beth@elementalwellness.net. Yeah, it was lovely talking with you guys today. I hope you enjoyed hearing a little bit more about what we consider the mind, the spirit, the Shen in Chinese medicine. So, yeah, I'm going to sign off here and hope you have a lovely evening, and I'll see you again next month. Bye, guys.